What's up guys, this is Caleb here, General Manager at Srkcycles, and this is Tips from a Salesman. Today we are going to talk about a topic that is very near and dear to my heart, and that is motorcycle buying myths. These are a couple tips that I have for you that I guess it's really not a tip, it's more of just a myth, but they're basically myths that a lot of people take from the car buying industry that try and transplant them right into the motorcycle buying industry. And they don't really translate that well, and they're also they don't really help the end result of purchasing a motorcycle. And so myth number one is that auctions are bad. So a lot of people, there's kind of a negative stipulation when someone asks me where a bike came from and I say, well, actually I think we got it at auction. A lot of people have a negative connotation in their head that for some reason, because it was run through an auction, and I think the car industry destroyed this a little bit, but because someone ran it through an auction and tried to, stick a dealer with it, that it's a bad bike or that's kind of a piece of junk. And that's just not at all the case. We buy numbers of bikes at auctions. You see in our videos of buying bikes at auctions. It's just what happens is with motorcycles, a lot of dealers get pretty brand specific and stick to kind of what they know. And so when they trade something in that's kind of not in their wheelhouse, instead of trying to turn around and sell it, a lot of dealers will just send it to an auction. We're a ton of different dealers and a collection of only used private dealers and new dealers are all bidding on it because they know that there's a wider market that they might be able to give it to somebody else who can kind of market and sell that bike. There's a lot of great bikes at auction. There is some junk at auction, but there's a negative stimuli that basically that if you buy the bike at auction or if the bike came from an auction, then it's a kind of a piece of junk, and that's just not at all the case. It could be the case, but that could be the case with anything. It's not 100% that it's a piece of junk because it came from auction. The myth number two is that a bike was traded in because it had issues. A lot of people ask me where we got the bike, and I say it was a trade-in. A lot of people ask, well, why did they trade in the bike? That's a good question to ask. That's a really good question to ask. It's not necessarily that they traded in the bike because the bike was giving them problems. And I know some people think that, especially this is very true in the motorcycle industry. People have tons of bikes. I have guys trade in bikes all the time that they say, I love the bike, I just want something different. So don't have a negative view of a bike just because it was traded in at a dealer. It didn't mean that you're getting someone else's headache or they had a ton of issues. Like I said in the previous myth, it could be the case, but it's not at all a general sweeping statement that that's the case. A lot of people really love their bike, really love what their bike provides for their style of riding at that moment, but they just want to upgrade to something else or they want to change to a different style of riding. It doesn't mean that the bike's a piece of junk. Number three, dealer bikes are better than private sale bikes. Just because it's at a dealer, a lot of people have a stigma that that bike was very thoroughly gone over and that bike was, they ripped the whole bike apart and made sure everything was perfect just for this one sale, and that's just not the case. A dealer obviously has a little bit more on the line when it comes to selling the bike. Obviously there's a dealership that stands behind the product that they're selling, so I'm not saying that the bike isn't a good product that they're selling, but it doesn't mean that it's necessarily better than buying a bike off Craigslist. You can very easily find bikes on Craigslist that are being sold by very reputable, upstanding people that have maintained and loved that bike. And it can be an absolute home run, and just like you could buy a bike at a dealer that's been completely beat up. It's never been maintained. So just the general stigma that it's better to buy it at a dealer than to buy it private, it's just not the case. It can be the case, but I think that that's kind of a myth. You can usually get a lot of good deals on Facebook Marketplace or Craigslist. So don't always just think, well, if I'm buying from a dealer, I know that it's the best possible bike, because that could not be the case. The next myth is that if the bike is inspected or on the reverse side is not inspected, it's a good or bad bike. Inspection varies state to state, but here in Pennsylvania, the state inspection is literally brakes, tires, and if your lights work. That's not necessarily a good indication as to whether it is a good bike or a bad bike. A lot of people, say to me, well, the bike is inspected. Yeah, that's fine. I mean, it takes $30 and any mechanic can do it. I mean, it's just not that big of a deal. You can very easily see or feel if you ride the bike if the brakes are good. You can very easily see if the tires are good, and you can very easily check all of the turn signals and the horn. If you go to buy a bike and the guy says, well, I did just get it inspected, That's not a huge deal. Most of the time, he just paid for the inspection sticker because very rarely do people have to do a ton of their bikes to get them inspected, unless there's something majorly wrong with the bike. But you can tell that outside of just having an inspection sticker, unlike a car that's a little bit different than that. So don't just buy a bike because it's been inspected or think that that adds a ton of value to the bike. And also too, don't not buy a bike because it's not inspected. You can use that as a negotiating tactic, you know, say, well, it's not inspected, but you know on your side that inspection, you know, if the tires look good, if the brakes stop the bike, you're probably gonna be able to get that inspected for just the price of the inspection sticker. And make sure the signals work. That's all super easy to do. And so don't necessarily think that a bike has more or has way less value because of that. If you're selling your bike, you could get it inspected. It might be a way for you to wrangle people in when it comes to buying it. But that's a myth I want to break. In our case, we don't necessarily get all of our bikes inspected. A lot of our bikes go out of state. And so a lot of people, you know, I tell them your bike will definitely pass inspection back in your home state. And if it doesn't, let me know, I'll make it right. I don't get all of my bikes inspected because I don't think it doesn't matter. When the minute the bike goes out of state, it has to go through a whole different state inspection. And most of the state inspections are very similar. It's tires, brakes, turn signals. It's a very easy thing to do. And the last myth that I want to break is that your bike has a CARFAX. A lot of people, and I guess the CARFAXes to deal with is the person to blame for this, and it's a good blame. I look at CARFAXes for vehicles all the time. It's not at all the case with bikes. There really is no detailed service history when it comes to an online database. When it comes to buying your motorcycle, you can ask for a history report. I think if you pull up a bike on a CARFAX, it gives you like 1 page of information, and it doesn't even give you the service history really. There's really no CARFAX database for motorcycles, and so a lot of people ask me, you know, can I see the CARFAX? And I have to explain to them, that really doesn't exist. Now there might be service records that come with the bike, or you might be able to locate the dealer that the bike was sold at or maintained at, and then you can find the service history, but you know, you're not gonna find a whole bunch when it comes to that. And most of the time, people look for, you know, wrecks or damage when it comes to on a CARFAX for a car. Most of the time when that happens on a bike, the bike ends up totaled. And so that's gonna be very evident when the bike has an R title. So last myth is that there is a CARFAX for bikes. There really isn't. I don't know if that's gonna change, but there's really not a good one place to go to find all the data on your bike's service history. All right, guys, that's some motorcycle buying myths. Thanks a ton for watching. Stay tuned for the next video.